Today's source material is an incredibly rigorous case study in Policy White Paper. It's titled Beyond the Label: Toxicity in American Nutrition from the Learn and Invest series.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. The author of this work is Gabriel B. Ajak. He's an entrepreneur, an author, and a senior executive fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. He holds an MBA in economics and finance and brings over 15 years of experience in public policy exploring faith, wisdom, and human capital through purpose-driven leadership.
Which is exactly why we're digging into this.
Right. Now, as we prepare to unpack his findings for you, please note, the information discussed in this podcast is strictly for educational purposes only and does not constitute professional advice.
Which brings us to the core of what we're unpacking today.
Yeah.
We're looking at a system that operates right in front of your eyes, in every grocery store aisle, yet it remains almost entirely invisible in its actual mechanics.
It does. And to ground our entire analysis, I need to share the foundation of Gabriel B. Ajak's argument with you. Here is the verbatim hook. America's food crisis is not, at its core, a problem of personal choice. It is a problem of system design.
That's the kicker right there.
Let me actually read the opening abstract of this white paper verbatim, because it is crucial you hear exactly how this system is structured. America's food crisis is not, at its core, a problem of personal choice. It is a problem of system design. The country's food environment has been quietly engineered over decades by a convergence of industrial profit incentives, regulatory blind spots, unequal neighborhood geography, and packaging chemistries whose risks remain poorly disclosed to the people most exposed to them. The food pyramid and the successive dietary guidance frameworks that followed it failed, not because the graphic was wrong, but because it encoded the deeper illusion that a nation could solve a modern industrial food crisis with a simple educational icon. Meanwhile, the food itself became more chemically mediated, more unequally distributed, and more aggressively marketed. In this case study from the Learn and Invest series, Gabriel B. Ajak examines the American food system through 4 linked channels. What is in the food? What happens to the food during industrial processing, where people are structurally forced to obtain their food, and what the food contacts before it is consumed. Examined through the analytical lenses of Harvard Kennedy School, MIT Sloan, the Hoover Institution, and the Wall Street Journal, the evidence supports a single sobering conclusion. Americans are not simply eating poorly, they are navigating a market in which convenience, chemical contact, and incomplete disclosure have been normalized as the price of modern life, and that normalization falls hardest on those who can least afford to opt out.
Wow. Now that is a staggering framing of the issue.
It really is.
It shifts the entire burden of responsibility. I mean, for decades, the narrative has been all about individual willpower. You're told that if you just read the label, if you just jog a little more, you can beat the statistics.
The personal failing argument.
Exactly. But this abstract is saying, no, the math is rigged. The system is structurally designed to extract margin from your convenience and externalize the biological cost right onto you.
It completely reframes it from a personal moral failing to a systemic architectural reality.
Yeah.
And this connects directly to the ethos of the Learn and Invest series. It's grounded in biblical stewardship and the optimization of human capital. The mandate to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and have dominion. It requires a foundation of health. Good stewardship of your body is absolutely inseparable from good stewardship of your wealth.
That's exactly it.
You cannot separate your physical infrastructure from your financial infrastructure.
Yeah.
If your biological capital is depleted, your financial capital cannot be fully realized.
That's the pure ROI perspective right there.
Yeah.
You can build the most robust, diversified financial portfolio in the world. You can have your 401k maxed out, your real estate investments humming, passive income streams perfectly aligned.
Sure.
But if the foundational asset, which is your physical body, is fundamentally compromised by the industrial food system, well, your compounding wealth means absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
You can't enjoy a dividend if you're spending it all on managing preventable chronic diseases. Left unexamined, you are essentially shorting your own human capital.
And to understand how we got trapped in this bad trade, we have to look at the historical framework.
We do.
Because a system this complex, this, efficient at making us sick, it didn't just appear out of nowhere.
No, it didn't.
It was a highly rational market response to a very specific set of policy signals. Let's set that historical stage for you because context is everything here.
Take us back.
So the turning point really goes back to 1964. That was the year the Surgeon General published a landmark watershed report linking smoking to cancer.
Right.
It was incredibly successful from a public health standpoint. It took a deeply ingrained cultural habit, exposed the science, and drove down smoking rates dramatically. It saved millions of lives over the following
It's a
decades.
huge policy win.
Exactly. So fast forward to the 1980s. Policymakers are looking at the rising rates of obesity, heart disease, diabetes. They're looking at the healthcare charts trending in the entirely wrong direction. And they think, we can replicate the 1964 smoking success with diet. We just need to identify the villain.
Just find the bad guy.
Right. So in 1988, the Surgeon General's office publishes a massive 700-page report on diet. And the number one enemy identified in that massive document, fat.
Fat. It became the absolute villain of the decade.
It really did.
And if you think back to the cultural moment, you remember the sheer panic around it. You had daytime television hosts pulling literal red wagons full of greasy animal fat onto their stages to visualize weight loss.
Oh, I remember those visuals.
The cultural sentiment turned violently against fat. It was public enemy number one. But here's what happens when policy demonizes a single macronutrient. The market reacts.
A market always reacts.
And that reaction birthed the 1992 USDA food pyramid.
The 1992 food pyramid. If you grew up in the 90s, you remember this vividly.
Oh, yeah.
It took that nuanced 700-page scientific report and distilled it down into a single simplistic graphic. Think back to staring at that giant poster on your elementary school cafeteria wall or in your pediatrician's office.
Staring right back at you.
It pushed carbohydrates, bread, cereals, rice, and pasta to the broad foundational bottom of the pyramid.
The base of the whole diet.
Yes. It explicitly recommended 6 to 11 servings of these a day. Think about that. You are essentially being instructed by the federal government to eat the equivalent of a loaf of bread every 24 hours in the name of health.
It's wild when you say it out loud.
And meanwhile, it squeezed all fats and oils into the tiny, restricted top of the triangle with the strict warning to use them sparingly. The profound illusion here, the systemic blind spot, was the belief that a complex, heavily industrialized food problem could be fixed with a simple educational triangle.
And this is where the policy completely disconnected from the biological reality.
Completely.
The guidelines critically failed to distinguish between complex carbohydrates, like whole oats and intact grains, and simple carbohydrates, like highly refined white bread, sugary cereals, and baked goods.
The body treats those very, very differently.
Like night and day. The refined stuff gets immediately converted to waist-expanding sugar. But the market didn't care about the biological nuance. The market saw an incredible opportunity.
Because the food industry isn't malicious in its intent.
Yeah.
It's simply a highly rational, hyper-efficient machine designed to capture market share and maximize profit margins.
Exactly. When the government and the public declare war on fat, the industry responds by engineering thousands of reduced fat and fat-free products. You have to look at the incredible ROI generated by this low-fat public policy craze.
It was a gold rush.
But here is the brutal culinary reality. When you remove the fat from a cookie, a cracker, or a yogurt, it loses its mouthfeel.
It tastes like damp cardboard.
Exactly like cardboard. The consumer might buy it once because of the fat-free halo on the label, but they won't buy it twice.
And you need the repeat purchase.
You have to have the repeat purchase. So to make that fat-free food highly palatable, to maintain that crucial consumer behavior, the industry had to replace the fat with something else. So they engineered these products with massive amounts of added sugars, artificial flavorings, and highly refined carbohydrates.
I remember the snack aisle in the mid-90s. We all thought we were making the responsible, healthy choice by eating a whole box of fat-free cookies.
We all did.
But we were essentially consuming pure industrialized sugar that spiked our insulin levels and left us hungry an hour later. It fundamentally altered the American diet under the guise of public health.
It transformed it completely, and the economics of it were staggering. By 2005, low-fat and fat-free products had exploded into a $35 billion market.
$35 billion.
That is a massive capital allocation based entirely on a flawed dietary premise. The numbers in the source material are sobering when you compare the late 1970s to today. Because of this historical pivot, Americans now eat approximately 60 more pounds of grains and 30 more pounds of sweeteners annually per person.
That's per person, every year.
Yes. And as a result, we are consuming up to 400 more calories every single day than we were a few decades ago. So you have to ask, who benefited from this shift?
Well, it certainly wasn't the American public's metabolic health.
No, not at all. The corporate incentive structure rewarded entirely different metrics. It rewarded shelf stability, brandability, and margin. The shift wasn't about health, it was about scaling a product. If you're running a massive food corporation, your absolute nightmare is a product that spoils in a week.
The logistics of fresh food are terrifying for a balance sheet.
Exactly. Your dream is a product that can sit in a warehouse for 6 months, be shipped cheaply across the country without refrigeration, and then trigger a targeted dopamine response in the consumer when they finally eat it. That is how you build a billion-dollar brand. We birthed the era of ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, because the market incentivized exactly those logistical and chemical properties.
And that is the critical pivot in our understanding. We have finally started moving away from obsessing over macronutrients, the endless debates of fat versus carbohydrates, and we are now focusing on what is called the NOVA classification.
NOVA scale.
Yes, if you aren't familiar with this, it's vital you understand it. The NOVA classification judges food not just by its fat or sugar content, but by its industrial processing level.
Let's break that down for you so it's crystal clear. Let's use an apple. If you pick an apple off a tree and eat it, that is NOVA Group 1 unprocessed or minimally processed. If you take that apple, mash it up in your kitchen, and make applesauce with a little sugar, that's Group 2 or 3 processed culinary ingredients.
That makes sense.
But the moment you buy a brightly colored, packaged apple cinnamon toaster pastry that can sit on a shelf for 3 years, a product packed with synthetic emulsifiers, artificial colors, and high fructose corn syrup, that is NOVA Group 4.
Group 4.
It is ultra-processed. We stopped looking at just the sugar and fat columns on the label and started asking a much more important question. How many industrial steps away is this product from a real plant or animal?
And that brings us directly to the core of Gabriel B. Ajak's white paper. He outlines 4 linked exposure channels that define how this system operates.
The 4 channels.
We're going to break down for you exactly what is happening in each of these channels. They are what is in the food, what happens to the food during industrial processing where people are structurally forced to buy it, and what the food physically touches before it enters your body.
Let's start with the first channel. What is actually in the food? Because the data we are looking at now is no longer just suggestive, it is overwhelming.
It really is.
The source material references a landmark umbrella review published in the British Medical Journal, the BMJ. Now, an umbrella review isn't just a single study with a few hundred people. It's a synthesis of 45 distinct pooled meta-analyses.
Huge data set.
It encompasses nearly 10 million participants across multiple geographies. And here is the most crucial detail from an investigative standpoint. This review explicitly excluded any studies with industry funding.
That exclusion is vital. When we look at the uncompromised data, the findings of that BMJ review are deeply sobering. Ultra-processed foods now make up to 58% of the daily caloric intake in high-income countries like the United States.
Almost 60%.
Let that sink in. More than half of the calories fueling our society are coming from NOVA Group 4 products, and that exposure is linked to 32 distinct adverse health outcomes. The paper points to a 50% increased risk of cardiovascular disease mortality and a 21% increased risk of all-cause mortality.
To put that in the bluntest terms possible, the study found absolutely no beneficial health outcomes associated with ultra-processed food consumption. None.
Just a completely negative biological yield.
Purely negative. These foods alter your gut microbiome composition. They introduce industrial emulsifiers and synthetic colorants that literally disrupt the mucosal barrier of your gut. And while they're bombarding your system with these novel chemicals, they systematically deprive your body of the dietary fiber and micronutrients it actually needs to function.
It's a dual assault.
Yes. Chemical overload combined with nutritional starvation.
And this leads right into the second exposure channel. What happens during the industrial processing itself? Because this is where the label on the back of the box, which we have all been trained to trust, becomes nothing more than a legal shield for the manufacturer.
A legal shield, exactly.
Now, you go to the store, you pick up a box of cereal, you see the words whole grains and heart-healthy fiber splashed across the front, and you think you were making a responsible choice for your family. But you have zero visibility into the process contaminants that were created in the factory.
Wait, let's pause right there. Process contaminants, that sounds like a sterile bureaucratic term. But what does it actually mean for you, the person eating the food?
It is the FDA's own terminology. Let me give you the primary example from the white paper, acrylamide.
Acrylamide.
When certain foods, specifically cereals, grain-based foods, and potatoes, are subjected to high-temperature industrial baking, roasting, or frying, a chemical reaction occurs. The natural sugars and amino acids react under the extreme heat, and a compound called acrylamide is formed.
Formed by the heat itself.
Yes. The International Agency for Research on Cancer has evaluated this compound and classifies acrylamide as a Group 2A probable human carcinogen.
Hold on, let me get this straight. You're the facts checker here.
I am.
Are you telling me that a known Group 2A carcinogen, a chemical linked to cancer, can be present in my morning cereal, and the company has absolutely zero legal obligation to put it on the ingredient label? How is that legally defensible?
It is legally defensible because of how the regulatory framework is designed. The ingredient label only requires manufacturers to list what they physically add to the recipe.
Ah, I see.
Because acrylamide is formed dynamically during the high-heat manufacturing process. It isn't a powder they scoop out of a barrel and add to the mix. It is exempt from the ingredient list. The label is entirely silent on it.
Wow.
You are consuming a processed contaminant, and the system is designed so that you have no way of knowing it's there.
So the label tells you the macronutrients, it tells you the calories, but it completely hides the industrial mechanics.
It hides the violence of the processing.
And we see this exact same dynamic even more starkly when we look at processed meats.
Yes, the data on processed meats is unambiguous. The World Health Organization's Cancer Research Agency classifies processed meat, which includes staples like hot dogs, bacon, and deli meats, as a Group 1 carcinogen.
Group 1. Let's make sure you understand the gravity of that classification.
Yeah.
That is the exact same definitive category as tobacco smoke and asbestos.
Exactly. There is sufficient, rigorously documented evidence that the consumption of processed meat causes colorectal cancer. It is not a probable link. It is a definitive causal link.
But look at our societal reality.
Look at the system design. Processed meat remains a foundational staple in our public school lunch programs.
Yep.
It is served in hospital cafeterias to patients recovering from surgery. It's in almost every everyday grocery cart, completely disguised by the cultural image of meat as straightforward, traditional, protein-rich nourishment.
It's the ultimate disconnect between scientific reality and market presentation. The ROI of serving processed meat in a school lunch program is fantastic.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's incredibly cheap, it has a long shelf life, and kids will eat it without complaining. The school district's budget stays balanced.
But the biological cost.
The biological cost is pushed decades down the line, straight into the healthcare system, in the form of elevated cancer rates. But if we really want to talk about the illusion of purity and the hiding of biological costs, we have to talk about the fourth channel, packaging chemistry.
Packaging chemistry.
This is what the food physically touches before you consume it. Let's look at the bottled water industry.
The bottled water industry is a fascinating case study in system design. It is a $350 billion global industry built almost entirely on the marketing premise of pristine, untouched purity. You looked at the bottle, and it has pictures of snow-capped mountains and crystal-clear springs.
But the contrast between that marketing imagery and the scientific reality is jarring. The white paper highlights a massive 2024 study summarized by the National Institutes of Health.
This study is terrifying.
It is. Researchers utilized advanced lasers to count the particles in a standard liter of bottled water. They found that a typical liter contained an average of 240,000 detectable plastic fragments.
240,000.
Think about that number, 240,000 fragments in a single bottle. And crucially, about 90% of these were nanoplastics.
We need to clearly define why the distinction between microplastics and nanoplastics matters so much for your health.
Go ahead.
A microplastic is small, yes, but a nanoplastic is infinitesimally smaller. It is so small that it operates on a different biological scale. Nanoplastics have the ability to actually cross your biological barriers. They don't just pass through your digestive tract. They can enter your bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and infiltrate your cellular structures.
From a biological ROI perspective, you are paying a massive premium for a product marketed as pure while willingly ingesting microscopic shrapnel that infiltrates your cells.
It's unbelievable.
And it's not just the water. We see this chemical migration everywhere. Let's look at fast food packaging. A major study in environmental health perspectives found a highly positive dose-response relationship between fast food consumption and exposure to a class of chemicals called phthalates.
Phthalates.
The phthalates are endocrine-disrupting chemicals. They're heavily used in food contact processing equipment, the tubes and conveyor belts in the factory, and in the actual wrappers and boxes the food is served in.
The heat of the food is the catalyst. When you put a hot burger or fresh fries into that plastic-lined wrapper, The heat causes the pellets to literally migrate from the industrial packaging right into the food.
It just leaches right in.
The ethical implications of this are profound. The FDA acknowledges that bisphenol A, or BPA, which is another chemical widely used in the linings of canned foods and plastic containers, is an endocrine disruptor. It mimics hormones in your body and is currently detectable in more than 90% of Americans tested.
You have to look at this through the lens of supply chain economics. From a purely financial standpoint, single-use plastic and chemical-lined packaging is simply cheaper transport.
It's always about logistics.
Always. It reduces the shipping weight of the product, it extends the shelf life indefinitely, and it simplifies the massive global supply chain. The corporation internalizes all of those logistical savings as pure profit, but they externalize the biological cost onto you.
You pay the price.
The packaging isn't just a neutral container, it is an active, chemically reactive part of the food system, contributing to a cumulative chemical exposure that is completely unaccounted for on any nutritional label anywhere.
You are unwittingly bearing the invisible externalities of their industrial logistics. Which brings us to a crucial question that listeners are likely asking themselves right now.
What's that?
Well, if this system is so flawed, if the food is packed with processed contaminants and the packaging is leaching endocrine disruptors, why don't people just opt out? Why don't they just buy fresh whole foods?
That is the natural question. But to answer it, we have to transition from what the food is to where it is sold.
The geography.
We have to examine the structural geography of this market, because for millions of Americans, opting out isn't just expensive, it is geographically and logistically impossible.
This is a critical transition in our understanding of system design. We're moving into the third exposure channel outlined by Gabriel B. Ajak, geographic inequity.
Right.
We have to look at the USDA data from 2024, which reveals that 13.7% of U.S. households, that is 18.3 million households, were categorized as food insecure.
Over 18 million.
But to truly grasp what that means on the ground, we must distinguish between two terms, a food desert and a food swamp.
Very important distinction.
A food desert is an area with limited or no access to supermarkets or fresh food retailers. It's defined by an absence. But the more analytically useful term for the reality most people face is a food swamp. A food swamp is an environment where unhealthy options are not just present, they are absolutely dominant. It is a neighborhood where fast food outlets, liquor stores, and convenience stores heavily outnumber any healthier retail options.
And public health research shows that living in a food swamp is actually a significantly stronger predictor of obesity and chronic disease than living in a food desert alone.
The presence of the bad is worse than the absence of the good.
Exactly. It's not just the absence of the good, it's the sheer overwhelming predatory saturation of the bad. But you have to ask yourself, how did the market map this out? Why are these swamps located exactly where they are? Capital doesn't just flow randomly.
It doesn't. And you have to look through the historical and policy lens to see the deep roots of this structural inequity. It didn't happen by accident.
No, it didn't.
It traces back directly to the post-World War II era. In 1956, Congress passed the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act. This massive, federally funded highway expansion, combined with deeply discriminatory housing practices like redlining, paved the way for what we now call white flight.
The demographic shift.
Middle-class white families moved out of the city centers to the newly built suburbs, and businesses, including the major well-stocked supermarket chains, followed the wealth.
Of course they did.
Urban areas, which predominantly housed Black and minority communities, faced severe systemic geographic and economic disinvestment. Today, decades later, Johns Hopkins research confirms that these food swamps and deserts still disproportionately trap Black, non-Hispanic households.
Yeah.
It creates a structural disadvantage that has absolutely nothing to do with personal nutritional knowledge or willpower, and everything to do with the zip code you were born into.
Let's break down the brutal unit economics of why modern grocery stores actively avoid these neighborhoods today. Yes, the math. The American grocery industry is a $700 billion behemoth, but it runs on razor-thin margins. The math is incredibly unforgiving. A typical supermarket operates on a 1% to 2% bottom-line profit margin.
That's tiny.
It is a highly cash and debt-intensive business to build and run a massive refrigerated footprint. Research shows that when supermarkets attempt to open in these historically underserved, low-income urban areas, they face higher operational costs, security, shrinkage, logistics, and they often lose an average of 4%.
A 4% loss.
So you have a 1% standard profit required by investors against a 4% operational loss in these specific zip codes. That creates a 5% gap. And here's the hard truth about the market. The private sector simply will not bridge a 5% gap out of the goodness of its heart. The capital risk is too high.
And as we know, nature abhors a vacuum. When the full-service supermarkets retreat because the margins don't pencil out, other corporate entities flood the zone to capture those consumer dollars.
Exactly. Enter the dollar stores.
Yeah.
Dollar General, Dollar Tree, Family Dollar. They have expanded their footprint by an astonishing 50% since 2011, and they have public plans for up to 20,000 more outlets.
20,000.
They specifically target these underserved communities. They build cheap, small footprint stores. But look at their inventory. It is highly processed, chemically mediated, shelf-stable goods.
It's aisles of no VA Group 4 products.
Cookies, canned processed meats, sugary drinks. Fresh produce is essentially non-existent. They are capitalizing on the geographic capture of these consumers. They know you don't have a car to drive 5 miles to a proper supermarket, so they become your only viable pantry.
And the policy attempts to fix this geography have often triggered unintended, devastating consequences.
Yep.
Like the gentrification paradox.
The gentrification paradox.
When a city council realizes they have a food swamp and successfully incentivizes a premium grocer like a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's to open in a historically black or low-income neighborhood, it drastically alters the local real estate market almost overnight.
The property values jump.
Zillow research shows that homes within a mile of a new Trader Joe's or Whole Foods appreciate in value twice as fast as the median home in the rest of the city. The property taxes skyrocket, the rents surge, and the very low-income residents the grocery store was ostensibly meant to serve are economically displaced. They are priced out of their own neighborhood just as the fresh food finally arrives.
It's a brutal economic cycle, and it forces us to ask the ultimate skeptic's question about this whole system.
Yeah.
Is this fundamentally a supply issue, or is it a demand issue?
Right.
Stanford University conducted a massive research study on this exact question. They looked at purchasing habits across different income brackets and estimated that only about 10% of the nutritional gap between the rich and the poor is due to an inadequate physical supply of healthy food in their neighborhoods. The researchers argue that 90% is actually customer demand, that even when presented with healthier options, people in these areas are actively choosing the processed, unhealthy options.
I understand the data they are presenting, but that purely economic view of rational consumer choice completely ignores the generational impact of systemic oppression and environmental conditioning.
How so?
You cannot separate a person's demand from the environment that forged it. If you grow up in a food swamp, surrounded by dollar stores and fast food, your taste preferences, your behavioral habits, and your literal neural pathways are shaped over decades. You are being habituated to ultra-processed foods that are specifically engineered by food scientists to be hyper-palatable and borderline addictive.
The dopamine response.
To say it's just a demand issue is to ignore how demand is manufactured. It is a compounding cycle of structural disadvantage. And that cycle accelerates the descent into what Gabriel B. Ajak identifies in the white paper as the poverty trap.
The poverty trap. This is where the financial architecture and the biological reality converge in a truly devastating way. Let's look at the youth data, because this is where the long-term ROI of human capital is decided.
The next generation.
The CDC reports that 30.1% of American youth, ages 2 to 19, consume fast food on any given day. It makes up 11.4% of their total daily caloric intake. We are building the bodies of the next generation out of the cheapest, most heavily processed materials available.
And we already know from the phthalate data and the acrylamide data we discussed earlier that this diet is deeply metabolically stressful.
And the economic cost of that long-term metabolic stress is almost incomprehensible. Let's look at the aggregate numbers. Diet-related chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, hypertension cost the United States approximately $4.1 trillion in annual healthcare spending.
$4.1 trillion every single year.
It is the leading cause of preventable death in the nation. This connects directly to the 40-40-40 trap that the Learn and Invest series so often discusses.
The 40-40-40 trap. For those who need a refresher, this is the financial system where you work 40 hours a week for 40 years of your life, only to retire on 40% of what was already not enough to survive on.
That's the one.
That financial system is designed to capture the worker's time and labor. Well, the industrial food system is the exact same structural logic applied to biology. It captures the physical body. Fast food is the ultimate convergence of time scarcity, low prices, and industrial preparation.
The time scarcity is key.
Think about the reality of a single mother working 2 shifts just to survive the financial trap. She does not have the 2 hours required to shop for fresh ingredients, chop vegetables, and slow cook a whole food meal for her kids. She is completely time bankrupt. She is forced into the convenience of the drive-thru.
Which means that being food insecure doesn't just mean you are starving or missing meals, though that certainly happens. More insidiously, it structurally pushes you toward cheap, shelf-stable, metabolically stressful calories because they are the only viable economic and temporal choice available to you.
It's the only option.
You are consuming products that are explicitly designed to extract long-term health costs in exchange for short-term caloric survival.
And this is where my contrarian nature kicks in.
Wait, I'm the contrarian.
Oh, true. But you have to follow the money on that $4.1 trillion healthcare bill.
Exactly. Who pays for it and who profits from the system that generates it? The food industry internalizes all the profits of selling cheap, highly scalable, engineered calories. They report record quarterly earnings.
A massive profit.
But they externalize all the costs. The public healthcare system, Medicare, Medicaid, the taxpayer, and ultimately you, the individual consumer dealing with a diabetes diagnosis, absorb the biological and financial externalities. It is an absolutely flawless business model if you completely remove human well-being and long-term societal stability from the equation.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most vital section of Gabriel B. Ajak's white paper, the reform agenda.
How do we fix it?
Because identifying the trap, seeing how the architecture is rigged against you, is only the first step. Dismantling it is the ultimate goal. The author approaches this reform through a highly sophisticated multi-lens policy framework. He utilizes the governance and transparency focus of the Kennedy School, the incentive analysis of MIT Sloan, the market discipline of the Hoover Institution, and the evidentiary clarity of the Wall Street Journal.
Let's stress test these recommendations because a policy on paper is very different from a policy in the market.
Always.
Recommendations 1 and 4 in the white paper focus on transparency and the FDO. The proposal is to create a tiered packaging disclosure architecture. It would require food labels to explicitly state the Novier processing classification right on the front.
Put it right on the front.
It would require the disclosure of processed contaminants like acrylamide above certain thresholds, and it would reveal the presence of forever chemicals like PFAS and BPA in the food contact packaging materials.
The ethical and historical argument here is that consumers cannot possibly make informed, free market choices when material information about chemical exposure and industrial processing is systematically concealed from them. You cannot have a free market without symmetric information.
That's a fair point.
This recommendation is an information intervention. It is not a top-down nanny-state ban on certain foods. It is simply demanding truth in advertising.
But from a harsh market impact perspective, we have to ask, will consumers actually change their behavior based on a new label?
That's the real question.
Look at history. We fought massive legislative battles to get calorie counts put on fast food menus across the country. And the post-implementation data showed that it barely moved the needle on aggregate purchasing behavior. People still bought the double cheeseburger. If a single mother in a food swamp sees a bright red warning label about nanoplastics on a bottle of water, but she knows her municipal tap water is contaminated with lead, and she has absolutely no other affordable options in her neighborhood, the label doesn't change her material reality. It might just add psychological stress without providing a viable economic alternative.
That is a very fair critique. Disclosure without systemic support can just breed despair. And that leads directly to recommendations 2 and 3 in the paper, which attempt to address the food swamps and the SNAP program directly.
The SNAP program?
The SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, serves approximately 42 million Americans. It is a massive lever of federal spending. The proposal here is to reform SNAP to align its purchasing power with actual public health evidence.
How so?
This would mean excluding the purchase of products in the highest harm evidence tier. Specifically, it would ban using SNAP funds to buy processed meats, which, as we discussed, are Group 1 carcinogens, as well as sugar-sweetened beverages and defined ultra-processed snacks. Simultaneously, the program would expand purchasing power, perhaps offering a 2-for-1 match for fresh produce and whole grains.
Now, as analysts, we must impartially note the immense, almost insurmountable political friction surrounding this specific recommendation.
Yes, we must.
This is where theoretical policy violently collides with partisan political gridlock. On one side, conservative policymakers often advocate for broad cuts to S&P funding entirely, arguing for fiscal responsibility and reduced federal spending.
Right.
However, the economic reality is that cutting S&P devastates the already fragile 1 to 2% profit margins of the few supermarkets operating in low-income areas. If you cut S&P, the grocery store closes, effectively worsening the food desert.
And on the other side.
On the other side, liberal policymakers often advocate for interventions like beverage taxes to curb sugar consumption. However, the economic reality of beverage taxes is that they are highly regressive, meaning they disproportionately place a financial burden on the poorest consumers who are already struggling.
We are not endorsing either political viewpoint here.
No, we are not. We are merely highlighting that this partisan gridlock effectively protects and sustains the food swamp status quo. Neither side's preferred mechanism actually fixes the root system design.
Absolutely. The structural dysfunction is remarkably bipartisan, and this is why the white paper's final suggestion is so intriguing. It suggests utilizing Hoover-style market discipline to fix the retail geography rather than relying on federal bans.
I like this one.
Instead of top-down mandates, local governments could use differential commercial property tax structures to actively reduce the saturation of fast food outlets in designated food swamp zones, while heavily incentivizing the development of healthy food retail. It uses the tax code to rebalance the market incentives, fundamentally changing the math for the commercial developers.
I love the mechanics of this idea. Capital flows where it is treated best. If a city makes it punitively expensive through property taxes to open the fifth dollar store or drive through in a 1-mile radius, but offers massive tax abatements to open a fresh market, the developers will shift their capital to the fresh market.
The market corrects itself.
It's about correcting a glaring market failure by finally pricing in the long-term healthcare externalities at the point of retail development.
It all comes back to system design. You change the architecture, you change the outcome. And that brings us to the synthesis of today's deep dives into the source material.
Let's wrap it up.
We have explored how the industrial food system relies on automated processes, opaque labeling, hidden chemical migration, and deep geographic inequality to extract value from you. But what does this mean for you, the listener, right now?
What's the takeaway?
In the Entrepreneur DNA portfolio that Gabriel B. Ajak champions, your body is your foundational, irreplaceable asset. You cannot enjoy compounding financial wealth. You cannot achieve your purpose if you are being slowly destroyed by compounding chronic illness. Left unreformed, the industrial food system is quietly, continuously shorting your human capital.
It is the ultimate bad trade. You are trading your long-term biological viability, your future energy, and your wealth in exchange for the short-term convenience of a drive-through or a shelf-stable snack. You are letting an industrial system dictate your baseline health.
To help you reverse that trade, we want to leave you with 3 specific questions to engage with. We spend hundreds of hours researching, writing, and crafting these deep dives to provide you with practical skills and applications to tackle real-world problems with precision and confidence. Consider these 3 questions carefully. Question 1. How will you apply the principles of the Body Stewardship Plan to audit your own pantry, identifying your top exposures to ultra-processed foods and hidden packaging chemicals?
Good question.
Question 2. We've seen how the industrial food system relies on automated processes and systemic design to dictate consumer behavior. As we enter the AI era, where automation will fundamentally shift the job market, how can you apply this lesson of system design to protect your career from being commoditized?
That's the scalability angle right there.
And finally, question 3. Gabriel Ajak notes that to win in the AI era, what he calls the personalized intelligence agent, or PIA, you must be the system director, not just the learner. How can you step up as the system director of both your personal health infrastructure and your professional skill set to ensure neither is replaced or depleted by automated industrial forces? What specific topic do you want Gabriel and our team to cover next to help you achieve this?
Learn and Invest is a listener and reader-supported podcast. To receive new episodes and support our work, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. Have feedback. Please email us at gabriel.ajak@hotmail.com and include the title of this series in the subject line.